There are a ton of game genres I like, for example Souls-likes, JRPGs, rhythm games, and first-person shooters, but there are only two that I could play till the heat death of the universe, those two being automation games and logistic games. So naturally my dream game is something that takes aspects of both genres and combines them in a neat little package. This is how the idea for Mini Factories was born, which is a high-score based factory builder where you have to connect and manufacture an ever-growing number of stuff in a limited area. The first version of this game was made for a game jam way back in 2021, so I think it would be fun to look back on that version before diving into the main game. Before we begin, allow me to paint you the full picture. It's the end of 2021 and I've been fully committed to working on Cloudworks for a good bit now, and I'm starting to feel a bit burnt out, so I decided to enter a game jam. I see that the 7th gym is starting up where the only limitation is having a first person player, which was the perfect thing to make something without being tied down by a team, but also having a set finish date that I couldn't push around. The idea I ended up coming up with was a factory builder that is more focused on short runs where you earn points rather than 100-hour long playthroughs. In short, the gameplay loop is about the player being in a small room and each round the dropper and the receiver spawns, and the player has to deliver the item the receiver asks before the timer runs out. And of course all the previous receivers still need to be fed when the new run starts, so the player has to work around the other bats or merge items and use splitters to untangle them later down the line. This ended up being really fun to play even if it was really buggy and filled with design issues. One of the best parts of this version was a leaderboard that tracks every player's best score, which incentivizes learning the game and playing it over and over again. After the jam ended I tried updating the game a few times, but no matter how many bugs I fixed and how many things I tweaked, I couldn't get it to feel better to play, so I ended up leaving it as is. But the idea of this game never really left me, so in March I decided to try and remake it from the ground up. I started out by making a list of all the issues the original Jam version had, like how the first person player doesn't fit the gameplay loop, or how hard it is to oversee the entire map, and how the physics-based items were really inconsistent. Then I started working on fixing all the issues. First I tackled the issue of the FPS controller and the visibility issues by turning the game into an isometric top-down game with a simplified art style. Small fun fact, the style for the resources actually came from a game I made for a Blackthorn Pros past the game jam. You can probably see from the clip behind me that I also fixed the inconsistent physics on the belts by dropping the physics part entirely and handling all the items with code. The way it works is that all the buildings that can have items on them, like the belts, the springs, the splitters and the receivers, have a component on them that stores the item currently on them. And each tick, all the buildings do their own things with any item that's currently stored on them. A completely new addition was the springs. They launch items over gaps and the player can change their distance. But to keep them balanced, each other distance adds an extra tick that they need to charge up. So if they are used over large gaps, their throughput gets really bad. Around this point I realized that having time between the ticks felt awful, so I made it so the speed of everything matches the time it takes for a tick to complete, which made all the actions look seamless. These visuals were starting to get a bit boring to look at, so around this time I decided to do a major graphics pass. And the new visuals ended up looking like... I don't want to praise myself too much, but I think it turned out pretty good. Here they are side by side just to really show the differences off. Just in case you are wondering what kind of black magic I used to make the game look this much better, it's a combination of color grading, ambient occlusion, and smaller details like the background gradient and the map's drop shadow. Another thing I did during this time was adding a queue system to the game, but that means if there are multiple items wanting to move to a spot, each item waits its turn. The way I did it is quite simple. When something connects to an item slot, I add it to a list of potential senders, and when something like a belt wants to send an item, it first checks if all the senders before itself are empty. Let's talk a bit about the design of this version, since it has changed quite a lot from the Jam version. One of the biggest changes was to how the player handles their items. In the original Jam version, the focus was more on merging items onto a single belt and untangling them with splitters. Meanwhile here, the focus is more on the space the player uses up and how they choose to get the required amount of items to the receivers. There are three main machines the player can use to handle items: the belt, which purely moves the item, the springs that launch items allowing them to move faster and skip over gaps and other machines, but it can be used on every item. Some items like glass are breakables, so if you try to launch them, they break, wasting the item, and splitters, which distribute the inputted items equally to 2 or 3 sides. You can also edit them to lock down any of the 3 sides, which is so you can have a splitter next to another line. There are 2 other machines the player has. One is the modular crafter, which is a machine that allows multiple versions of itself to be connected together to form crafting recipes, though we will get to this in the next devlog since they are still being worked on. And the 5th one, which I'm not sure of yet. The 2 ideas I have floating around for it are both tied to it being a limited availability building that you get during a round for each score milestone you achieve. One is a booster that doubles the point worth of any item passing through it, and the other is a teleporter that can take any item from one point to another instantly. Though I'm not really sold on either of them, so if you have an idea of your own for what the 5th building should be, let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, please consider liking the video and subscribing. YouTube's algorithm is really harsh to newer channels, so every bit of interaction helps. Anyways, I don't want to waste any more time, so let's get back to the video. I've been having some friends and other game just playtest the game to see if the changes I'm making are going in the right direction. Some of the most common feedback was that the game needs a proper tutorial and that it needs more quality of life features like being able to see where a dropper's item will go more easily. We are just about caught up with the game's current state, so I think now would be the perfect time to talk about the things I want to add in the future. One thing I already have systems made for is multiple maps. Since this game heavily relies on space and how the player utilizes it, I feel like one of the best ways to add more challenging content is by having different maps that restrict the space in some way. One of the ideas I have floating around is a map that has an island in the center with 3 unit-wide bridges connecting it to the outer ring. Another thing I really want to add is a challenge mode that shakes up the rules of the game, like restricting the player to only using springs. And of course I want to add in a leaderboard, since some friendly competition is always good. Only difference with the Gen version's leaderboard would be that each map and each challenge would have its own separate leaderboard instead of it being a unified one. And lastly, a thing I'm not 100% sure I will add, which is a custom map maker. If I end up doing it, it will be a relatively simple one that only allows building on a grid with only the buildable surface and the spawner surface. I don't want to drag this video out since it's already all over the place, so I think this would be the right point to end it. The next video I'll make will probably be a shorter tutorial about some random topics, since I really need to practice making well written scripts for my videos. Anyways, thank you so much for watching.